The shoes sat on my kitchen table for 3 days before I touched them. That sounds strange, I know. They were just old shoes. Brown leather, cracked at the toes, the laces stiff with age. The kind of shoes my uncle wore every day, no matter the weather. The kind everyone laughed at. The kind my family handed me at the funeral, like a joke. But every time I walked past that table, my chest tightened, because those shoes were the last thing he ever gave me. And Uncle Robert was not a careless man. I'm Elena, and if there was one thing I learned growing up, it was this. Robert never did anything without a reason. While my family fought over money at the lawyer's office, I had stood there holding those shoes, feeling like a fool. My aunt had smirked, my cousins had whispered, someone even laughed out loud. Figures, one of them said. Robert always liked her for no reason. They were wrong. He liked me because I paid attention. That third night, I finally sat down and picked one shoe up. It was heavier than it looked. Not much, just enough to notice. I turned it over, pressed along the sole. Something felt off. My heart started beating faster. I ran my fingers inside the shoe and felt a small bump near the heel. Carefully, I tugged at the worn lining. It didn't tear. It opened like it was meant to. Inside was a folded piece of paper, old, yellowed. My hands shook as I pulled it out. It wasn't money. It was a note. Elena, if you are reading this, it means they did exactly what I expected. I'm sorry you had to see it, but I knew you would understand. Tears blurred my vision. I sat there at my kitchen table holding that note like it was alive. The message continued. They will take what shines. They will ignore what lasts. These shoes are proof that I still trust you. I flipped the note over. There was an address and a date. Tomorrow. My uncle had died 3 days ago. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I took the day off work. I put the shoes back in the box, grabbed my coat, and drove to the address. It was across town in an old industrial area I barely recognized. The building was small, brick. No sign, just a metal door with a faded number. I knocked. An older woman opened the door. She looked at me for a long moment, then at the box in my hands. "You're Elena," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," I replied. She stepped aside. "He said you'd come." Inside, the place smelled like dust and paper. Shelves lined the walls, stacked with boxes, folders, and locked cabinets. "My name is Margaret," she said. "I was your uncle's accountant and his friend." She led me to a small office and motioned for me to sit. "Your family took the money," she continued calmly. "The cash accounts, the properties listed in the will, exactly as he planned." I frowned. "Planned?" Margaret smiled, just slightly. "Your uncle didn't build his life on what people could see. He built it on what they overlooked." She opened a drawer and pulled out a thick folder. "Your uncle owned assets that never appeared in the main will. Private investments, silent partnerships, intellectual property, things registered under holding names." My stomach dropped. "How much?" I whispered. Margaret looked me straight in the eye. "More than they took, much more." I felt dizzy. "But why give them anything? Why let them take millions?" "Because," she replied, "greed makes people careless." She slid the folder towards me. Inside were documents, legal, clean, signed years ago. Everything was left to me. Not immediately, not publicly, conditionally. The will they read at the funeral was the decoy. The real transfer activates only after the estate is settled and no legal challenges are pending. My family had 30 days to contest. 30 days of silence. 30 days of believing they had won. "And the shoes?" I asked. Margaret chuckled softly. "Your uncle knew no one would check them, except you." I laughed then, a short, broken laugh that turned into tears. For the first time since the funeral, I didn't feel small. I felt dangerous. Margaret leaned forward. "There's more," she said. She pulled out another envelope. "Your uncle also left instructions." My hands trembled as I opened it. "Do not confront them yet. Let them celebrate. Let them spend. Let them expose themselves. When the time comes, you'll know." I exhaled slowly. My family thought the story was over. They thought I was the poor niece with nothing but a pair of shoes and a broken heart. That night, my phone buzzed. A message from my cousin. "Drinks this weekend to celebrate Uncle Robert's legacy? You should come." I stared at the screen. Then I typed back, "Sure, I'll be there." I placed the phone face down on the table and looked at the shoes again. They weren't rusty. They were loaded. And my revenge didn't need shouting. It just needed time. They didn't wait even a week. Before my uncle's grave had settled, before the flowers wilted, before the lawyer finished filing papers, my family started spending like the money had already doubled. I watched it all from a distance, quietly, carefully, just like Uncle Robert taught me. Social media told the story before anyone spoke to me directly. My cousin Jason posted photos from a luxury car dealership, a red sports car, captioned, "New chapter, new ride." My Aunt Linda shared pictures of a beach resort in Mexico. White sand, blue water, cocktails in tall glasses. Finally living the life we deserve. Even my mother, who hadn't defended me once at the funeral, posted a photo of a diamond bracelet. No caption, just a sparkle emoji. I didn't react. I didn't like. I didn't comment. I saved everything. Because people who think they've won stop being careful. 2 weeks later, Jason called me. "Elena," he said, cheerful and loud, "how are you holding up?" I smiled to myself. That was the first time he had said my name since the funeral. "I'm fine," I replied. "Listen," he continued, "we're all getting together this weekend. Family dinner. You should come." There it was. The invite wasn't about family. It was about showing off. "I'll try," I said calmly. "Great," he said. "Oh, and don't worry. Dinner's on us." I thanked him and hung up. Dinner's on us. That sentence stayed with me because he didn't know that every dollar he was spending was bringing him closer to losing everything. At Margaret's office the next morning, I handed her my phone. "They're spending fast," I said. She nodded. "Faster than your uncle predicted, actually." She opened a file and turned the screen toward me. "These accounts are being monitored," she explained. "Not illegally. Public records, business filings, loan applications." I leaned in. Jason had applied for credit using expected inheritance as collateral. So had my aunt. So had my mother. They were borrowing against money they didn't fully own yet. "Can they do that?" I asked. Margaret smiled, thin and knowing. "They can try." That weekend, I went to the family dinner. I dressed simply. Nothing expensive, no jewelry, just clean, neat clothes. I wanted them comfortable, confident. The house was loud when I arrived. Laughter, music, wine glasses clinking. They all looked at me when I walked in. Some surprise, some pity, some guilt. Jason was the first to speak. "Elena, you made it." He hugged me like we were close. My Aunt Linda handed me a glass of wine. "You've been so quiet lately," she said. "We were worried." I nodded. "I've been busy." "With what?" she asked. "Work," I said. No one asked more. They talked about trips, cars, renovations, plans. So many plans. They never asked about the shoes. They never asked about me. At one point, my uncle's oldest son raised his glass. "To Robert," he said, "and to family." They all drank. I didn't. Later, Jason leaned close to me and lowered his voice. "Look," he said, "I know you didn't get much from the will, and that sucks, but if you ever need help..." There it was, the charity offer. I met his eyes and smiled softly. "I'm okay." He shrugged. "Just saying." That night, when I got home, I opened my laptop. Margaret had given me access to a secure folder. Inside were reports, timelines, legal triggers. My uncle's plan was elegant. The estate money my family received came with conditions, spending limits, reporting rules, debt restrictions. Rules they hadn't read. Rules they were already breaking. 3 days later, the first notice went out. A bank flagged Jason's loan application. Another flagged my aunt's overseas transfer. Nothing dramatic, just delays, questions. My family started calling each other. Then they started calling me. My mother left a voicemail. "Sweetheart, have you heard anything strange? There's some issue with the accounts." I didn't respond. Jason texted, "Hey, do you know any good financial advisors? Things are weird." I waited. Then I received a message from Linda. "Your uncle always trusted you. Did he ever mention anything about restrictions?" I stared at the screen for a long moment. Then I typed, "No." It wasn't a lie. He hadn't mentioned restrictions. He had mentioned consequences. A week later, Margaret called me. "They're panicking, and that's exactly where we want them." "What's the next step?" I asked. She paused. "They'll look for someone to blame." I didn't have to wait long. Jason showed up at my apartment unannounced 2 nights later. He looked tired, angry, less confident. "You knew it," he accused, standing in my doorway, "didn't you?" I crossed my arms. "Knew what?" "That the money wasn't clean," he snapped, "that there were strings attached." I tilted my head. "You didn't read the paperwork?" His jaw tightened. "You always thought you were smarter than us," he said. I stepped back and opened the door wider. "No," I said calmly. "I just paid attention." He left without another word. That night, when I got home, I opened my laptop. Margaret had given me access to a secure folder. Inside were reports, timelines, legal triggers. My uncle's plan was elegant. The estate money my family received came with conditions, spending limits, reporting rules, debt restrictions. Rules they hadn't read. Rules they were already breaking. 3 days later, the first notice went out. A bank flagged Jason's loan application. Another flagged my aunt's overseas transfer. Nothing dramatic, just delays, questions. My family started calling each other. Then they started calling me. My mother left a voicemail. "Sweetheart, have you heard anything strange? There's some issue with the accounts." I didn't respond. Jason texted, "Hey, do you know any good financial advisors? Things are weird." I waited. Then I received a message from Linda. "Your uncle always trusted you. Did he ever mention anything about restrictions?" I stared at the screen for a long moment. Then I typed, "No." It wasn't a lie. He hadn't mentioned restrictions. He had mentioned consequences. A week later, Margaret called me. "They're panicking, and that's exactly where we want them." "What's the next step?" I asked. She paused. "They'll look for someone to blame." I didn't have to wait long. Jason showed up at my apartment unannounced 2 nights later. He looked tired, angry, less confident. "You knew it," he accused, standing in my doorway, "didn't you?" I crossed my arms. "Knew what?" "That the money wasn't clean," he snapped, "that there were strings attached." I tilted my head. "You didn't read the paperwork?" His jaw tightened. "You always thought you were smarter than us," he said. I stepped back and opened the door wider. "No," I said calmly. "I just paid attention." He left without another word. That night, when I got home, I opened my laptop. Margaret had given me access to a secure folder. Inside were reports, timelines, legal triggers. My uncle's plan was elegant. The estate money my family received came with conditions, spending limits, reporting rules, debt restrictions. Rules they hadn't read. Rules they were already breaking. 3 days later, the first notice went out. A bank flagged Jason's loan application. Another flagged my aunt's overseas transfer. Nothing dramatic, just delays, questions. My family started calling each other. Then they started calling me. My mother left a voicemail. "Sweetheart, have you heard anything strange? There's some issue with the accounts." I didn't respond. Jason texted, "Hey, do you know any good financial advisors? Things are weird." I waited. Then I received a message from Linda. "Your uncle always trusted you. Did he ever mention anything about restrictions?" I stared at the screen for a long moment. Then I typed, "No." It wasn't a lie. He hadn't mentioned restrictions. He had mentioned consequences. A week later, Margaret called me. "They're panicking, and that's exactly where we want them." "What's the next step?" I asked. She paused. "They'll look for someone to blame." I didn't have to wait long. Jason showed up at my apartment unannounced 2 nights later. He looked tired, angry, less confident. "You knew it," he accused, standing in my doorway, "didn't you?" I crossed my arms. "Knew what?" "That the money wasn't
The first real crack showed when the money stopped moving. Not vanished, not frozen completely, just slow. Bills that used to clear in hours took days. Transfers sat in review. Credit cards that once felt limitless suddenly declined in grocery stores, gas stations, and restaurants where waiters pretended not to notice. My family wasn't used to resistance. They had lived their whole lives believing money bends to confidence. Now it wasn't bending at all. Jason called me again. This time, his voice wasn't sharp, it was shaky. "Elena," he said, "we need to talk." I met him at a cafe near my apartment. Neutral ground, public, safe. He arrived early, tapping his fingers, checking his phone every few seconds. "You look tired," I said, sitting down. He laughed without humor. "Yeah, funny how stress does that." We ordered coffee. He didn't touch his. "Something's wrong," he said. "The banks, the lawyers, everyone keeps asking questions." I stirred my cup slowly. "That happens with estates." "This isn't normal," he snapped. Then he lowered his voice. "They're saying we violated terms." "What terms?" I asked. He hesitated. "The will," he muttered. There it was. "You read it this time?" I asked gently. He glared at me. "You knew Uncle Robert was hiding something." I didn't argue. Instead, I said, "He didn't hide anything. You just didn't look." Jason leaned back, rubbing his face. "Mom's losing it. Aunt Linda, too. They thought this was easy money." I smiled faintly. Nothing about Uncle Robert was ever easy. Silence fell between us. Then he asked the question I knew was coming. "What did he leave you?" I met his eyes. "The truth." He scoffed. "Come on, Elena. You got shoes, right?" "Yes," I nodded. "That's it?" "No." I stood up, placed cash on the table, and looked down at him. "That's all you need to know." Over the next 2 weeks, everything unraveled faster. The estate sent formal notices. Audits began. Accounts were reviewed for misuse. One by one, my family members were called in for meetings they didn't understand and couldn't control. My mother came to my apartment next. She looked smaller than I remembered, less proud. She didn't knock. She rang the bell twice, hard. When I opened the door, she burst into tears. "I don't understand," she said, stepping inside. "We did nothing wrong." I closed the door calmly. "You ignored the rules." "What rules?" she cried. "We're family. It was our money." "No," I corrected. "It was Uncle Robert's money, and he trusted it to conditions." She stared at me. "You're enjoying this." I shook my head. "I'm surviving it." She sank onto the couch. They're saying the funds could be reduced, even taken back. Yes, I said, if violations continue. She looked up sharply. You knew. I knew he planned for greed, and I knew he planned for me. Her face hardened. Why didn't you warn us? I finally let the anger rise. You kicked me out of the funeral like I was nothing. You watched them laugh while I stood alone. That was different, she whispered. No, I said firmly. That was the same. She left without another word. That night, Margaret called me. They're scrambling, trying to shift blame, accusing each other. Good, I replied. They've hired lawyers, not good ones, fast ones. I laughed quietly. Desperate people don't choose wisely. A week later, the family held an emergency meeting. They invited me. I almost didn't go, but Uncle Robert's voice echoed in my mind. Be there when they face themselves. The meeting took place in my aunt's house, the same place they celebrated weeks earlier. Now the air was heavy, curtains closed, wine untouched. Jason spoke first. We need to talk about Elena. All eyes turned to me. She's been working with Robert's lawyer. She knows more than she's saying. That's because he trusted her, and now we're paying for it. I stood calmly. You're paying for your choices. My uncle's youngest son slammed his fist on the table. You think you're better than us? No, I said. I think I'm different. My mother spoke last. What do you want? The room went silent. I took a breath. I want what he wanted, accountability. They laughed bitterly. Then I reached into my bag. I placed the shoes on the table. Old, rusty, silent. These weren't a joke. They were a test. Confusion spread across their faces. Jason frowned. What test? I made him executor of the compliance clause. Any reported through me. Gasps filled the room. You can't be serious, my aunt said. I am, I replied. Every report, every decision, final. My mother whispered my name. You thought he humiliated me, but he armed me. Silence. Fear. I picked up the shoes. You took millions and lost your footing. I walked out before they could respond. Behind me, I heard shouting. Blame. Regret. Cracks turning into collapse.
The morning after the confrontation, the house was empty, literally. My aunt's silver curtains were drawn, the driveway deserted. For the first time, their chaos wasn't spilling into the streets or spilling into my life. It was contained, behind locked doors and shattered egos. I sat at my kitchen table, sipping black coffee, letting the silence sink in. For years, I had replayed that funeral over and over. The laughter, the looks, the way they handed me those rusty old shoes as if they were a joke. But now, years later, everything had changed. The legal documents from Uncle Robert's estate had arrived overnight. Each page was meticulously prepared. Each clause had been fulfilled exactly as he wanted. Any breach by my family was now documented, undeniable, and enforceable. I smiled reading each paragraph. It wasn't revenge in the traditional sense. No yelling, no destruction. It was a slow, calculated victory, the kind that made them realize that greed carries consequences. By noon, Margaret called. Her voice was calm, almost clinical. The auditors are finishing their reports. The discrepancies in the estate, they're significant. Significant enough? I asked, keeping my voice steady. Enough to freeze accounts and possibly involve the courts for fraud, she said. I leaned back, feeling the weight of years of planning and observation pay off. Uncle Robert had left me more than just the estate. He had left me the authority to ensure justice, not through confrontation, but through law, the kind of justice that couldn't be ignored. By mid-afternoon, the first official call came from my father. His tone was restrained, almost polite, which made it worse. "Elena, can we discuss this?" I laughed softly, shaking my head. "There's nothing to discuss, Dad. The accounts speak for themselves." He sighed. "We didn't think it would go this far. We just thought—" "Thought what?" I interrupted. "That you could take everything and leave me with a nothing? That's exactly what you did. And look where it got you." The call ended abruptly. I didn't mind. Their scramble to save themselves would continue all week, each action monitored, each lie unraveling, each excuse documented. Meanwhile, I focused on my life. My company was expanding. Projects that had once seemed impossible were now reality. The students I sponsored through Uncle Robert's foundation began to succeed, sending me thank you letters and photos. Their joy was pure, untainted by greed or betrayal. One afternoon, a reporter reached out. "We've noticed the estate is causing quite the stir in the family business world. Any comment?" I smiled faintly. Sometimes fairness is the loudest statement you can make. By the end of the month, the estate had been audited completely. The reports were conclusive. My family had violated several clauses, some knowingly, some blatantly. Banks froze certain funds, legal notices were filed, and any attempt to bypass the restrictions would result in immediate penalties. The best part? They couldn't publicly blame me, not a word. Everything was executed according to Uncle Robert's precise instructions. No revenge story, no scandal, just truth and accountability. One evening, I drove past my family's old neighborhood. The house looked smaller somehow, the lawn unkempt, the energy heavy. I didn't feel satisfaction, not really. What I felt was relief, freedom, the knowledge that no one could use me again as a stepping stone. The following week, my mother sent an email, short, polite, formal. "We understand the conditions of the estate and will comply fully. We apologize for any wrongdoing." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. I had everything I wanted: my independence, my reputation intact, my peace of mind. Claire tried one last attempt to reach me through mutual friends, implying that our family ties should be restored. I smiled and said nothing. She eventually realized that without the leverage of inheritance, she had nothing to manipulate. By the second month, life returned to normal for me. Projects, meetings, mentorships, and friends filled my days. I occasionally glanced at the rusty shoes, still on a shelf in my apartment. A reminder, a symbol. I never needed to raise my voice. I never needed to yell or retaliate physically. I had let them reveal themselves, their greed, their entitlement. Every misstep, every lie, every manipulation was recorded, verified, and documented. By the time they realized the full weight of their mistakes, it was too late. Months later, the media briefly mentioned the legal outcomes. Headlines focused on estate disputes and family accountability, but no one knew the whole story, and that was perfect. My life, my success, my story remained mine, untainted and untouchable. One day, I walked into the office building of one of my major clients. The receptionist greeted me warmly, colleagues waved, students I sponsored passed by with smiles. The world I had built from nothing now welcomed me with open arms, respect, and recognition. And that's when I realized something important. Revenge isn't about making someone suffer. It's about reclaiming your life, proving your worth, and building a future where your happiness is untouchable. The rusty shoes remained on my shelf, a relic of what I had endured, a symbol of how far I had come. Whenever doubt crept in, I would glance at them and remember I had turned humiliation into empowerment, betrayal into strategy, and injustice into freedom. In the end, my family's greed had been their downfall. My resolve, patience, and clarity had been my victory. and for the first time in years, I slept peacefully, knowing that no one could ever take what I had built away from me. Because some lessons can't be taught by words alone. They must be lived. And I had lived mine to perfection. The weeks following the estate battle brought an unexpected clarity. I realized that revenge had given me closure, but it hadn't defined me. It had freed me. Now it was time to focus on growth, on creating something that no one could ever touch or undermine. I woke up early, as always, the city's skyline glowing orange through my apartment window. The rusty shoes, once a symbol of humiliation, now reminded me of resilience and strategy. I poured my coffee, sat at my desk, and opened my laptop. My empire wasn't just financial, it was a statement. Each project I managed, each contract I signed, each student I helped was a reinforcement of my independence. Business meetings dominated my mornings. Investors, partners, and clients respected me not only for my acumen, but also for the calm authority I exuded. I was no longer the overlooked niece or daughter. I was Elena, the woman who had been underestimated, who had been handed old shoes at her uncle's funeral, and had turned every insult into a stepping stone. Yet, I didn't ignore the personal side of my life. I hired a mentor coach to help me navigate the complex emotions left behind by my family's betrayal. She reminded me that true power wasn't just legal or financial, it was emotional. She encouraged me to embrace my accomplishments without guilt, to celebrate victories quietly but fully. One afternoon, I attended a charity gala for students without family support. As I spoke with young people, I felt a surge of purpose. Their stories reminded me of my own, the nights spent alone, the struggles to prove my worth, the pain of being ignored. Unlike me, many didn't have the financial means to create a safety net. I vowed to be that net for them. Meanwhile, my family's silence continued to speak volumes. My mother occasionally sent brief emails, apologetic but empty. Claire had started dating a wealthy young entrepreneur, perhaps to secure the status she had once assumed she would inherit. My father attempted to reach out to mutual business contacts, hoping to regain influence. But by now, I had built my own network, a strong one that didn't depend on bloodlines. I spent evenings planning expansion. I opened new offices, mentored new employees, and launched programs for underserved youth. The satisfaction wasn't just in the money or the power, it was in knowing that every decision was mine. Every success was untouchable. No one could diminish my achievements. Then, one late evening, a familiar name appeared in my inbox. Margaret, the auditor who had helped me navigate the estate conflict. Her message was simple. Elena, I've discovered something you might want to see. There are still assets hidden. Assets your family thought they could control without you knowing. Curiosity piqued, I arranged a discreet meeting. She handed me folders detailing accounts, offshore investments, and hidden property. My family had underestimated my persistence. They had assumed I would stop at reclaiming what was rightfully mine through the official channels, but they hadn't counted on me digging deeper. I smiled. This wasn't just about money, it was about accountability. They had tried to manipulate every situation, and every hidden asset revealed just how far they would go to secure control. Now, the power balance shifted even further. Over the next few weeks, I methodically handled each discovery. Every asset was either secured under legal agreements or used to establish charitable initiatives. I documented everything meticulously. Once again, I acted quietly, deliberately, letting the facts speak for themselves. The lessons I had learned at Uncle Robert's funeral were still fresh. Patience, strategy, and restraint were more powerful than impulsive anger. Each step I took reminded me that revenge isn't about hurting someone. It's about asserting control, reclaiming dignity, and building a future that cannot be compromised. One evening, after a long day of meetings and legal preparations, I stood on my balcony. The city lights twinkled like stars. I felt a profound sense of accomplishment, not because my family had lost, but because I had grown stronger. My empire, my life, my peace, they were mine. I reflected on the journey, the funeral, the old shoes, the betrayal, and the silence that followed. Each memory was no longer a wound, but a foundation. They had tried to break me. They had underestimated my resolve. And yet here I was, unshaken, unstoppable, and unapologetically powerful. That night, I wrote in my journal, "They taught me the value of silence, the strength of patience, and the importance of self-respect. Every step I take from now on is mine alone. I owe nothing to those who doubted me." Sleep came easily that night. For the first time in years, it wasn't restless or filled with anxiety. It was calm, steady, and deserved. Over the next months, my empire grew. I launched international partnerships, invested in education, and mentored young women facing similar family betrayals. Every success, every student's achievement, every life I touched reinforced the truth I had learned. Power doesn't come from heritage or blood. It comes from resilience, clarity, and action. By the end of the year, Elena wasn't just a name in the business world. She was a symbol of perseverance, of justice, of self-made triumph. Those who doubted her now watched from afar, powerless, realizing too late that the girl they thought was fragile had built an empire stronger than anything they could imagine. And as I stood in my office overlooking the city, I finally understood the ultimate lesson of revenge. It isn't about proving someone wrong, it's about proving yourself right, building a life they can't touch, and never allowing anyone else to define your worth again. The rusty, old, raggedy shoes still sat on my shelf, a reminder of the journey from humiliation to power. I smiled as I traced their worn edges. Once a symbol of mockery, they were now a testament to endurance, strategy, and ultimate triumph. I was no longer a victim. I was a victor. And nothing, not greed, not betrayal, not family, could ever change that.
The air in my office was crisp, the kind that sharpens your mind and focuses your thoughts. I had spent months building my empire, reclaiming hidden assets, mentoring young women, and expanding my network internationally. But even as I thrived, one truth remained. The ultimate victory wasn't just in success, it was in ensuring that those who tried to destroy me understood the full weight of their miscalculation. I sipped my coffee, staring at the city skyline. The sun had just begun to rise, painting the buildings in hues of gold. Each morning reminded me of how far I had come, from that funeral where they handed me rusty shoes, to this empire where my name commanded respect. I smiled. My family had underestimated me at every turn, and yet I had risen, silent but unstoppable. It all started when Margaret, my trusted auditor, uncovered the last set of hidden accounts. My father and Claire thought these were long forgotten, shielded by layers of legal obscurity. But they hadn't counted on me being meticulous, patient, and relentless. Every detail had been scrutinized, every transaction traced, every loophole noted. I had proof, ironclad proof, that their attempts to deceive and manipulate were extensive. I picked up the folders Margaret had left. Offshore accounts, unreported investments, properties transferred under shell companies, all revealed. I didn't feel anger, I felt clarity. Every move I would make now had precision, like a chess game where I had already anticipated every response. I decided to call a meeting, not at a neutral location, not online, at the very estate where it had all started, my uncle's house. The same hall where they had celebrated his life while snatching away his fortune. The hall where I had been handed rusty shoes. It was time for a reckoning. They arrived, predictably, my mother, my father, and Claire. Their faces masked anticipation, confidence, even arrogance. They didn't expect that I had prepared for this moment, that I had already secured legal counsel, documented every transaction, and strategically positioned myself for the confrontation. I stood at the head of the long oak table. My empire's growth had instilled a quiet confidence in me. I didn't need to raise my voice or demand attention. My presence alone commanded it. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my tone calm, deliberate. "I hope you understand why I asked you here." They exchanged glances, silently trying to anticipate my approach. My father opened his mouth, but I raised a hand. "Please, allow me to finish." I laid out the folders. "These are the records of the assets you attempted to take without my consent. Everything you thought hidden, every attempt to manipulate my inheritance, every account moved or concealed, it's all documented." Claire tried to interject, but I held up a hand. "Let me be clear. I'm not here to accuse emotionally. I'm here to make a choice. I am legally entitled to what is rightfully mine, and I have the evidence to ensure it is." The room went silent. My mother's lips quivered, Claire's hands fidgeted, my father's jaw tightened. They realized slowly that they had miscalculated me, that the quiet, underestimated niece had transformed into a formidable force. I continued, my voice unwavering. "You've had your chance to make amends, to act with integrity, and you chose greed over family. Today, that choice ends. Legally, every asset I have reclaimed or secured is untouchable. Every project, every investment, protected. My life is mine, my future is mine, and my dignity is untouchable." I watched as the weight of my words sank in. My father's face paled. My mother tried to find the right words, but none came. Claire, who had always thought she was clever, looked stunned. They had assumed I would compromise, that I would seek validation or approval, but I sought neither. I leaned forward slightly. The rusty shoes I was given at the funeral, they no longer represent humiliation. They are a symbol of what happens when someone underestimates determination, strategy, and resilience. They are a reminder that true power is built silently, meticulously, and without apology. Silence enveloped the room. I let it sit there, heavy, undeniable. My family had been the architects of their own failure, and now the consequences were undeniable. Finally, my mother whispered, "Elena, we didn't realize." I shook my head. "You never realized, and that's why this moment exists. Not for vengeance, not for anger, but for clarity. You see now what underestimating me cost you, and it's a lesson you will carry forever." I stood, collected my folders, and smiled. "I am done here. I have no interest in your approval, no need for your recognition, and no desire to let your choices dictate my life. My empire, my dignity, my achievements, they are mine alone." Without another word, I turned and walked toward the door. My family sat frozen, speechless. For the first time, they understood the true cost of their betrayal. Outside, the cool evening air felt liberating. I exhaled, a mix of relief and triumph coursing through me. The city lights reflected off the streets, glimmering like reminders of the possibilities I had created. Every step I took was mine, every breath mine, every choice mine. The final checkmate wasn't dramatic or violent. It didn't need to be. It was the quiet, undeniable shift of power, the realization that I had taken control, protected my assets, and reclaimed my life without stooping to their level. My family's actions had set the stage for my ultimate victory, but I had chosen how that victory would unfold. Later that evening, I placed the rusty shoes back on their shelf, next to the folders and legal documents. They were no longer a symbol of betrayal, but of triumph, strategy, and resilience. I knew I would never forget the lessons I had learned, the patience, the discipline, and the unyielding commitment to self-respect. As I looked out the window, reflecting on the journey from humiliation to power, I felt a profound sense of freedom. My empire was stronger than ever, my influence undeniable, and my family, they would remember, silently, what happens when underestimating someone with determination leads to inevitable consequences. Revenge, I realized, isn't about destruction. It's about reclaiming what's yours and building a life that no one can ever take away. And I had done it flawlessly. The morning sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse office, reflecting off the polished floors and glass walls. I stood there for a moment, taking it all in. The empire I had built from nothing, piece by piece, was finally complete, not just financially, but emotionally and strategically. Every setback, every betrayal, every stolen opportunity had led me here. I traced my fingers along the edge of my desk, feeling the weight of every decision I had made. This was not just about money. It was about reclaiming respect, dignity, and self-worth. The lessons learned from my family's betrayal had been harsh, but invaluable. They had tried to break me, to humiliate me, and to steal everything I had ever dreamed of. And yet, through patience, strategy, and relentless focus, I had risen stronger than they could have imagined. I remembered the rusty shoes from my uncle's funeral. For months, they had symbolized humiliation. But now, placed on a display near my awards and contracts, they represented something entirely different: resilience, determination, and the quiet power of meticulous planning. Every morning, seeing them reminded me of the path I had walked and the victories I had earned. The last few weeks had been particularly significant. My family, after the confrontation and exposure of their manipulations, had receded into silence. Calls went unanswered, messages ignored. Claire, my mother, and my father now understood that I would no longer allow them to dictate my life or claim credit for my achievements. Their attempts to manipulate, guilt, or charm me were meaningless. They had lost control, and I had gained freedom. I turned my attention to the future. My company, once small and vulnerable, had expanded globally. Initiatives that supported young women, those ignored by their families or left to navigate life alone, had flourished under my guidance. I had created scholarships, mentorship programs, and networks to empower others the way I had empowered myself. The satisfaction of knowing my success could uplift others was profound. It was a form of revenge far beyond money or status. It was legacy. Yet, despite all the victories, I remained cautious. I had learned never to let trust be blind, never to forget the lessons of betrayal. Every contract, every partnership, every new venture was meticulously vetted. But this caution was not fear, it was wisdom. The girl who had once been handed rusty shoes would never be that naive again. One afternoon, as I prepared for a high-profile business conference, I received a package. It was from an anonymous sender. Inside were a set of legal documents, meticulously compiled, showing that my family's assets had been frozen due to prior fraud and mismanagement, exactly as I had suspected, but had left untouched until now. I smiled, knowing that justice had been quietly served without me needing to lift a finger. My victory was complete. They had tried to cheat, steal, and manipulate, but every move had been anticipated and countered. At the conference, I stood on stage before hundreds of attendees, speaking about resilience, perseverance, and empowerment. I shared my journey, not in the spirit of vengeance, but to inspire others. Life will challenge you, I said, my voice steady and commanding. It will test your patience, your resolve, and your belief in yourself. But know this: your worth is never determined by those who fail to see it. Stand tall, work diligently, and protect what is yours. Revenge is not about retaliation. It's about creating a life so strong, so undeniable, that those who doubted you are left in awe. The audience erupted in applause. I felt a wave of satisfaction, not from recognition, but from the knowledge that my story, my struggle, and my triumph could now serve as a beacon for others. Later that evening, I returned to my apartment. I removed my heels, set them aside, and glanced once more at the rusty shoes. I whispered to myself, "You tried to break me, but I turned every insult, every slight into strength." The apartment was quiet, my empire humming softly around me. I felt peace, a hard-earned, unwavering peace. My phone buzzed. It was a message from an old friend, someone who had once doubted my abilities. "Congratulations, Elena. You've truly built something extraordinary. You've proven them all wrong." I smiled. Yes, I thought, I have, and I've done it on my own terms. That night, as I looked out at the city skyline, I realized the most important lesson of all. Revenge is not about destroying others, it's about building yourself so completely, so immovable, that no one can ever take your power away again. My parents, my sister, my family, they had tried to diminish me. They had underestimated my determination, my patience, and my intellect. But I had transformed every ounce of their betrayal into fuel, and in doing so, I had created not just wealth or influence, but freedom, respect, and a legacy that would endure far beyond their attempts to control me. I leaned back, letting the quiet hum of the city envelop me. The journey from betrayal to triumph had been long, painful, and exacting, but it had been mine. And now, with every lesson learned, every victory earned, and every obstacle overcome, I could finally say with certainty, I was unstoppable. I was free. And I had won. The legacy of my victory was not just measured in money or power, but in strength, independence, and the unshakable confidence that no one ever could take my life, my dignity, or my dreams from me again. And in that moment, I knew this was only the beginning.
The moment they handed me my uncle's rusty old shoes at his funeral, I knew my family had decided who I was worth to them. My name is Elena, and this is how my revenge began. The church smelled like old wood and flowers that were already dying. Everyone wore black, but not everyone was sad. Some people cried into tissues, others whispered behind hands, and some, like my family, watched everything with sharp eyes and quiet smiles, already thinking about what came next. Money. My Uncle Raymond was lying in a closed casket at the front of the room. He never married, never had kids, but he had something everyone wanted: success. He owned property, businesses, accounts none of us were ever allowed to ask about. Growing up, he was the only one who noticed me, the only one who asked how school was going, the only one who remembered my birthday. Everyone else treated me like background noise. At the funeral, I sat alone in the third row. My mother sat with my aunt and cousins closer to the front. No one saved me a seat. No one looked back. When the service ended, people didn't rush to hug. They rushed to talk. Conversations turned low and quick. Names were mentioned, lawyers, assets, papers. I stayed quiet. That's something people always forget about quiet girls. We hear everything. After the burial, we gathered at my uncle's house, the same house I had cleaned for him every summer, the same house where he let me sleep on the couch when I needed space from my family. Now it was full of people who hadn't visited him in years. The lawyer arrived, with a briefcase. Everyone sat straighter. My aunt crossed her legs, my cousins stopped pretending to be sad. My mother finally looked at me, then looked away again. The lawyer cleared his throat and began reading. Property went to my aunt. Stock accounts to my older cousin. Cash to my mother. A vintage car to my younger cousin. Every name got something valuable.
Every time a name was called, there were nods, smiles, silent relief. Then the lawyer paused. Elena Martinez. The room went still. I felt eyes on me, curious, almost amused. The lawyer reached down and placed something on the table. A shoebox. Old, cracked, taped at the corners. "These belong to your uncle," he said. "He left them to you." My cousin laughed. Out loud. My aunt smiled and shook her head. "That's very Raymond," she said, like it was a joke. My mother didn't even look embarrassed. She leaned toward my aunt and whispered, "At least she got something." I walked forward and picked up the box. Inside were a pair of men's shoes. Brown leather, scuffed, rust on the buckles, old enough to smell like time. People watched me like they expected tears. I didn't cry. I thanked the lawyer, held the box close, and left early. In the car, I sat with the shoes on my lap. My phone buzzed. A message from my cousin. "Guess Uncle Ray didn't think much of you." I turned the phone face down. That night, I went back to my tiny apartment. I placed the shoes on my table and stared at them for a long time. I thought about my uncle, how he used to say, "People show who they are when money is involved." I finally looked inside the shoes. Something was tucked deep in one heel. A folded piece of paper. My hands shook as I pulled it out. It was a hand-written note. "If you're reading this, they did exactly what I expected. Don't trust them. Check the lining." My heart started pounding. I tore open the inside seam of the shoe. Inside was a small flash drive. I sat down hard. I didn't know what was on it yet. I didn't know how big this was. But I knew one thing for sure. My uncle didn't leave me trash. He left me a door. And while my family celebrated millions they thought were theirs, I had something far more dangerous. The truth. That night, I opened my laptop, and everything changed.